North-South in Bangladesh. I did my undergrad from San Francisco and my master's from Italy. So I thank you all for inviting me here to talk about this. The paper that I actually presenting is exploring new methods of latrine construction in rural Bangladesh. It's not just latrine construction, we will talk about the construction as well. I have been teaching for 10 years in the Department of Architecture, and I also have my firm. It's a non-profit organization, Bangla Bari. So Bangla Bari, we do research and publications. I will start, I like this quote by George Bernard Shaw, and say, you see things and you say why, but I dream things that never were and say why not. It's very important. I found that this is very motivating challenge quotation for me. Why not? Can we solve the problem? And there's this famous quote that we cannot solve the problem the same way we created it. Bangladesh is a bit parallel to African countries, but at the same time it's very different. It's 1,000 miles away, but we also face the same kind of challenges that African countries do. We have less resources, plagued by colonization for 200 years. It's kind of like a difference of disparity of wealth. A lot of these things, challenges are the same. Bangladesh, as you know, and everyone knows Bangladesh, right?
Yeah.
I lived in the States for 8 years. Not even 8 people knew where Bangladesh was. So Europe is different. The Bangladesh, unfortunately, the Bangladesh, you guys know it only mostly comes from like the videos and the news bites, and you see all the time. And I always say that it's like trying to understand Dutch population by watching their movies. It's not the representation, and this is like the darkest city. You can see it's extremely densely populated, and this is the representation of Bangladesh most of the time you see. There's a night vision, but at the same time, this is like a sprawling urban landscape. It looks like urban blocks and everything. But if you just focus out, zoom out, this is Bangladesh actually. It's 70% of the population still lives in the villages, and it's a sprawling. It has more population than Russia. Country, but it's no ways, it's always been projected as the small country next to India, but it's actually not. Bangladesh is 93rd in terms of, if you take like more than 200 countries in the world, so there are more countries that are smaller than that. And in the village areas, you actually see, this is actually villages. This is pictures that we took like a few months ago. In the sprawling villages, it's very flat land. There's hardly any things over here. And there's the art architecture. But this is very kind of romantic views. I'm showing a few of the villages, and there are actually a lot of parts of it. It's very nice, and this is the technology is 1,000 years old, more than 1,000 years old. This art architecture, no architect went there to build it. To give you an idea of the housing population, the total population about 160 million plus. Rural population is 100 million plus. Household is 32 million, and total architects available is like 1,500 only. So, and the rural architecture, anybody who works with the rural architecture is less than 100 people. So that's like one architect for every 1 million people. That's the kind of idea. To give you an example, like if you look at the bottom over here, you see your Netherlands, you're doing carbon fossil fuel emission about like 10 metric tons of carbon emission per capita. Yeah. This is, it's for a small country. And if you look at the same thing in Bangladesh, it's 0.5. 0.5. It's like 20 times lower than per capita per person. It's not because we are environmentally conscious; it's because we are poor. The villages, we don't have washing machine, we don't have single-use plastic. So the carbon emission per capita is very low. So it's because I'm showing you guys this to give you an idea that what is beyond the news, because news, it's very powerful. You get projected the news over and over again, you start believing things. The first question they ask is design necessary? You have these beautiful villages, you have the people with the lands, they take it and they produce back. And actually, they also did this understanding like how much actually waste that's generated, and in the rural areas of Bangladesh, it's very low because they kind of recycle most of the things. So who am I or who are we to go and propose them new design ideas? It's very colonial mentality. We inherit this from the British that, okay, as an architect, you have the degree, so you go and you tell them, here I am to solve your problem. But what happens is, so this duality of like, if we should help them or we should leave them apart, continued for a while, and even if we wanted to be current, because there's like one architect for every million Bangladeshis, but if you fast forward it, you see that in the present day, the building materials for architecture in the rural areas is bricks, CI sheet, the child labors, and there are social problems even in the architecture because it's not even considered as a bad thing. And then you have the timbers, which is very bad. So how did we get to this? Like there was a vernacular architecture, very sustainable, very cool, and then we come to here with the CI sheet buildings that is vulnerable to weather. And and CI sheet, it produces 6,000 metric tons of carbon emission every year. I mean, if you guys, I will give you guys the link at the end. You read the papers and you'll see that the amount of carbon emission. We don't have iron ore. These things actually comes from either from China, from the United States, the steel corporations. They push us, and since the Second World War, they've been pushing it first to India, to China, then to Bangladesh now, so that we can make products with this. So it's a big thing. It creates mindless architecture. You don't have to be an architect to understand this. During winter it's cold, during summer it's very hot, and these are completely devoid of any vernacular architecture or vernacular tradition. And the biggest problem we are facing in Bangladesh right now, this is actually choking. There's all these brick kilns around Dhaka, 8,000 metric tons of carbon emission, like pure pollution. And if you take all the industries of Bangladesh, the amount of pollution they do, like clay-fired bricks, they create the biggest pollution. It's also because we are a third world country. There's not much environmental regulations. We don't have enough resources to feed this thing. But the demand is skyrocketing. All the Bangladeshis, they want to live like you guys, in a nice house, the beautiful buildings, and these things. Everybody wants to build with the brick. It's a big challenge. It's not so small. And the problem is that when they do build it with the brick structure, then it's a beautiful building, no? there's a problem because they think, okay, this is how we should build, but it ends up being like really terrible. And so I asked the guy, like, why did you build it in the top? He says, oh, because the water comes until here, so I built it like this. But this is not the solution. The wall treatments fall apart because traditionally we've been taught that, okay, you plaster it, but for a country like Bangladesh where there's monsoon 3 months a year, this is not sustainable. This is not a good solution at all. What do we do? Where I am, because again, it's realized that Bangladesh, I have like about 10 students, and I always tell them that we have to completely new way of thinking. We cannot solve the problems the same way we created it. For example, the sanitation, I will talk about it a little bit later, that if this is the sanitation that you have, then you can actually change it, and you have to believe that you can actually change it. This was before. We went to this house, and this was the sanitation, and the women used to wait until late at night so they can go to the sanitation because there's hardly any coverage of this. You build it like this. We transformed it into this, and this is just a simple sanitation, costs less than $100, and it improves lives. This was the before the guys were having, and we got some funding, and I also put it. And this is the art architecture and art and bamboo architecture we did. Art architecture is nothing new. This what you see. It's called Kantajit Temple. It's a complete terracotta with art architecture. This is 350 years old. There's examples of 600-year-old, 500-year-old buildings, art architecture. The mosques, that was built over there. Now you have to understand how did they build? Like this one is with thin brick. So the difference is that they didn't have brick kiln. It's not like they didn't use brick. The brick has been there for hundreds of years. But the way of building bricks and the demand was in a different retrospective. I show this picture. This is not mine actually, and downloaded from the internet. Just to show you this, like we still have this clay pottery industry because it's cheap, it's easily available, and this. So they make these small kilns. So traditionally, for hundreds of years in Bangladesh, they were making these thin bricks because when you think, if you just increase it by 1 centimeter of the brick thickness, you require like almost 50 degrees more temperature just to bake it, much more than that. So hundreds of degrees, you actually need 600 degrees to take this brick. And this brick, if you do, when we did the research, we realized that the idea of the brick, this 3 inches by 9 inches by 5 inches, actually came from British. The British, they brought the bricks. The thin bricks, they said, no, this is not good enough. it has to be thick bricks. So historically, it requires a lot. There is a historical evidence of why this brick came into being, or why does this brick? Because for 1 or 2 structure buildings, you don't necessarily need this. We did experiments in Bangalore. We did experiments with the ram dirt. It's very expensive because it's labor intensive. We went back to the silver ram, and we realized the benefit of it, the art buildings. But at the same time, we cannot go back to the original traditional art buildings, because actually right now that costs more than making a brick building. Because you need a lot of labor. Before, the labor was almost next to nothing, so you could build it. So you actually have to build something that is efficient. For example, this one is from Fatih's book, and it shows that how the comfort zone actually minimizes. So the art buildings always remains in the comfort zone. And you have to understand that with the Africa, what we actually share is this temperature. And for you guys, it's almost impossible. Unless you live in a hot, humid country, you cannot understand what it means to be without an air conditioning. It actually just productivity even goes down. Compressor box, so this machine we brought from China actually, and we kind of reverse engineered it, and now we are producing locally. And we found that this compressor blocks actually has much more benefit, because the cons are that you need labor training, mindset is important to change, and then it needs a machine to make it. But the pros really outweighs, because it's cheaper in the long run, waterproof, provide excellent insulation, all these things. The cost, we saw that like a regular brick, it's actually the same cost. It costs the same, but this one is much better in all terms, and even in the long term it costs less. And I'm not going to go into the detail of why the thermal mass in a hot summer day actually is better, and the art block process, how it's much better, because there's tons and tons of information available all over the place. Just to show you a quick video of how we make the SCCV. Let's see if we can do it. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Bangla Bari's video blog.
But I'm sorry.
Today we are going to be talking about how to make a compressed earth block, otherwise known as CEB. For now, John will take over. Here you go, John.
Perfect cement mud block. You load the press. Need a bit of sand on the bottom. In goes the mud, cement, sand mixture. A little bit more sand. We'll lock it off. Compress it down.
So there comes our brick, and after 21 days you cure, and it's very interlocking brick, and it is actually a very good way of doing this. So I'm sorry, I'm doing a little. So I just want to show like how this thing adds up, because interlocking brick we have had much success, and I'm fast forwarding because this is a bit boring construction process.
And this creates a kind of an internal hub. We'll see it in a second. We also put these pipes inside, which helps us to guide all the wirings and plumbing. So as you can see, in 3.5 feet, there's a lintel all around the building. And at 7 feet, on top of the door, we have another lintel. As you can see, the entire house doesn't have any RCC columns. The columns are inside. So it's a bit different construction technique, but it becomes extremely strong. If we see like an extra view of this building, you can see that there are columns going vertically and horizontally. So what happens is this creates a kind of an effect, a net effect, which is very good for earthquake proofing. On top, we pour these things, and you put your doors and windows and roof together, and voila, you have a house.
So yeah, we build houses. We build houses, clinics, schools, and so the earthquake test was done in Peru. I just got this video, and what happened in Peru is like they did it with the regular bricks, and regular bricks falls down in times of earthquake. very fast. With 6.5 it breaks down. With the earthquake reinforcement, with the test with CSCB, especially with the earth blocks, it actually went on to 8.5 and it still didn't break because of the mesh that you create inside. You know, I hear a lot of times that people say, oh, art block is great, but for the urban areas it's not sustainable. You know, it's kind of a thing repeated on some. Okay. So I will go fast, but I just want to say that actually for urban revolution, it can also be possible. We use the jute-based tin, art cement tali. We developed and bamboo curing for the houses. And the building process takes some training, but we made the clinic. We were in the reviews. We also worked with this. So this school, I have to talk about this school because we built this school because I've been to many of the schools before doing this, and we realized that the kids, they don't want to sit down in one place, and they're always very hot in the CI sheet. So I got rid of all the tables and chairs, and you know, the light comes in. They were much more happier. In the sanitation, the thing we are working on right now, we saw the challenges in the sanitation field all over Bangladesh. Especially it became, this is Rohingya camp. You know that there is 1 million Rohingya in Bangladesh right now. And the toilets were like this. So we were actually hired to build some of the toilets over there. But we were building and we realized that it's also a lot of cumbersome process because you have to get different materials from different places. So right now we're working on this plastic. You know, we're working with plastic. Why? Because the plastic life cycle doesn't stop here. You know, like you're supposed to have the coming back, but it doesn't go back. So we create more and more plastic. You all use the single cup and then you throw it in the recycle and you think, oh, it's great. You know, I've done my part, but actually it goes back into the garbage. It's just much nicer looking garbage. So right now we're developing this little Bangla latrine. It's a prototype development we are going on, which is a modular toilet. So we have like about different modules so that we can add together and very rapidly we can create. So we recycle the plastic, make these things, and create the solution. Change is possible.